Alright, so what I've gone through and done is set up, let me just make sure this is recording, great. So I've gone through and I've set up this lovely mix shader with a flavor of chrome on it and a flavor of whatever the heck this blue stuff is. So I'm going to show you how to use the different scratch maps we've made. So like I have these from before. I'll show you how to use these as a mix shader to go back in and maybe save yourself a little bit of effort. So what I like doing is, and this is mostly for like super different materials, like, you know, metal versus paint. What you can do is use the existing shaders, or, what am I saying? You have this lovely modular Photoshop file, and you can modify it repeatedly so that you can really easily change the positioning of stuff, and basically just export one map and replace one map instead of being like, oops, I moved a scratch, now I need to move my metalness and my roughness and my color and all of these. Like, you need to generate like 10 maps. So the process for doing that is basically the same as like the 2 maps I'm going to show you for this. I'm not really going to go through that. There's a million videos on that, but anywho. So using this for the mix shaders is basically we're just going to go in and map in a mix weight like we would for a normal procedural texture. And the important thing about this is that so this is why I say you normally need to generate like 1 or 2, yeah, this is the one, this is a hideous one. So you normally need to generate 1 or 2 different textures for your objects or to use procedural texturing. So right now I have this is the photo that I've loaded in. You can see there's like, this is basically what I before was designing to be a bump map. That's gonna make like a little bit of weird stuff. I'm gonna turn on alpha's luminance, and I'm gonna also repeat this texture, say 4 times. Yay, oops, what have I done? And you can see, for one, I've once again set up my mix shader backwards where chrome is scratching down to paint, which makes no sense. But in this case, we're also getting a little bit of weird, render faster, darn you. We're getting a little bit of weird, oh my god, sorry, sort of areas around the edge here where the map is, it's not black or it's not white. So it's doing something like halfway between, which isn't something in this case that we want. I'm going to also be really lazy and just invert my textures. You should either fix that in Photoshop or just swap the order of your shaders. But you can see like this doesn't quite look realistic. It's like a little bit of an odd, where you still have that paint chipped in there. So for something like wood or something else, this might make sense. In the case of metal and paint, it kind of doesn't, so just watch out for that. So what you'd want to do instead for something like this is go in and use a file without any without this like extra sort of shading at the end. You just want black or you just want white. And the really easy way to do this, if you've sort of set things up the way I have in Photoshop, is basically to go in and just say grab all of your scratches and just be a crazy person and do a color overlay on them and make them all black. And then you can very, very easily turn this on or off if you need to adjust your textures, and you're like, cool, I move stuff around. Oops, and I need to re-export a map. Color overlay, and then you have your map. So let me do this and save it out as mix scratch gid. Hopefully it's actually good. If it's not, it's gonna be really awkward. And then I'm gonna go ahead and upload that. Mix scratch good. And now we have something that looks much less insane. Which is, you know, always fun. So we have these lovely scratches. And the next thing that I usually like doing is going through and adding some bump maps to those individual textures. So, oh lord, I've not labeled any of these because I apparently hate myself. Let's make this, where am I going? Specular, color, metalness. Alright, clearly this is my chrome. So what we're gonna do is take the first file that we had and use that as a bump map on the chrome. So that we'll have, this is like, imagine it's chipped through the paint and it's like chiseled away at the chrome. Like that's the effect that I want for this. So you could do this with a displacement map or, you know, bump map, normal map, whatever. I just have bump maps existing, so I'm going to use the bump maps. So I'm going to grab that and go in and strictly speaking, I do already have this file texture just floating around my computer. I should just use that one. And actually, I think I have... Yes, I have another version of this, which is actually... This is like the non-effect background, so this is better than white in this case for a bump map. So theoretically, we should be able to apply that, and you can see it's showing up in there only on the chrome areas. I do need to go... If you repeat UV on one texture, you have to do it to all of them. Ooh, that looks so bad. But now you can see that we have a little bit of bump in that area. So if we kind of float off to the side a little bit, you see you have that like nice little reflection. And since I've... Oh my goodness. That was weird. So the one cat we have a hamper, and she loves jumping in the hamper, and she just jumped in the hamper, jumped out of the hamper, and then like got stuck to the hamper and did a backflip. That was weird. Sorry. But yeah, so you have this nice little edge here because it's slightly indented from the paint, which makes a nice sort of pseudo-realistic effect where it almost seems like the paint is like a tiny bit raised. Like you get a little bit of depth to the paint before that rips off and gets to the chrome. So that's always kind of a cool, fun, and interesting effect. And then we also have somewhere on here, so this is the same scratch textures from my last video. So we have those like silly micro textures that I made, or those little micro scratches. So we're going to apply those here. And in this case, we don't actually necessarily want to apply them to the actual... What am I saying? Sorry. We don't want to apply them to the actual chrome because that's all covered by paint in there. What we want to do is apply that to the paint, and paint can totally get micro scratches and like little dings and stuff in it without showing through to the metal. So these are like the aggressive scratches. The little micro scratches are going to be like the little fun thing at the end. And I'm going to relabel this paint 3. Apparently is what I'm going for this time. And I'm actually, you know what, I'm going to be a real person, and this is totally, if you're doing stuff like this is absolutely how you should hook stuff up. I'm going to edit, delete unused nodes. So we have this file texture, and I'm going to drag this into my shader. I'm also going to stop this render really quick, because I am clicking too many things, and this is madness. Alright, so I'm going to go into my paint, grab the file texture, and drop it in here. And what this does is if you edit this texture once, right, so if you change something, it's going to change it every single place that you've used this texture. If you import the texture 7 times, you'll have to re-upload the texture 7 times, which sucks and is gross and is boring and nobody wants to do that. So we've gone through, and I don't know how well the micro scratches are actually going to show up on the paint, but theoretically, they should be in there. Theoretically. I do imagine that they would be very, very subtle. And let me actually just go through. I know I have some versions of this that are like really, really bad with the micro scratches, and just like having them like, that's really obnoxious. That one should definitely show up. Great. So we do have here these little micro scratches, and they show up. And in this case, I think they're way overdone. So I still have the existing scratch texture from like in here. The reason I'm keeping that in is it's getting masked off, so doesn't really matter. Ideally, what you could do is like make a separate scratch texture for this, and that would be a little bit... Oof, that scrolled far. And that would be a little bit sort of nicer looking. But this will get you, you know, with 2 maps, a pretty not completely horrendous looking effect. So this is like kind of I'm not going to say this is a lovely texture, but I mean this will pretty much do what you need it to do. So this is usually if I'm doing something aggressive with my textures, like, you know, scratching through a surface, this is how I try to set things up where applicable. You could also theoretically do something weird where you basically duplicate the texture and like map in bumps into it. So effectively what you would do is like, let me actually try doing that really quick. It should be pretty unusual. So full disclaimer, I've actually never tried this before. We're gonna try it now. Hooray. So I'm going to take this and just duplicate my paint texture. We have paint 1. I'm going to grab my mix shader and throw paint 1 into paint. The only thing we want to do for this, so this, if we render that, it should just look pretty much like generic gross paint. What we're going to do for this is take paint 1 and go in to, like, right now, so like, imagine that we wanted this scratch to be darker, and this is a very convoluted way of doing things. It just might save you map exporting, maybe in the future. So what we could do is go into paint 1, and we actually apparently have not put a bump map in this, which is weird. So it seems like when you duplicate, I don't usually duplicate shaders very often, but it seems like it perhaps does not copy over your bump map information. So now we have this. So we have these really dark scratches in this area down here, but they have not carried over, and they're not getting super aggressive in here, where we have these little bitty maps. So practically speaking, like if you looked at this, it's the exact same settings for the overall shader, but like we can change the color and this is something else. We just happen to have all of the exact same settings so that when you're messing with these little, you know, micro scratches and all of that stuff, it kind of looks the same. Functionally at that point, I think it might actually be better to just make texture maps for things. But conceivably, you would find a use for this if you needed to. Yeah. The benefit, I think, of, like I said, I think this particular example with the paint on paint is a bit excessive, but the benefit of using procedural texturing or like pseudo-procedural texturing for something like this is if we wanted to go through and do the paint to chrome, like the original example, and you didn't do it procedurally, you wanted to do it with texturing, what you'd have to do is, so like let's actually look at the different textures that we have. I don't know why I'm doing weird accents. All right, so we have a base weight of 1, base weight of 1. But you have different colors, you have different metalnesses. So we have color, metalness, specular weights, roughness, IORs, whatever, anisotropy. I have no idea how you say that. So right there, that's 5 different texture maps you're going to have to make and export every single time you export a scratch, which sucks. And I'm not even looking at stuff like coat. So there's different roughness on the coat of the paint. So like anytime you move a scratch, you then have to re-export all of those textures, and I am a lazy person and I don't want to do that. So I think it kind of just makes sense to mess with stuff like that. The other thing that you could theoretically use this paint on paint example for is something like in the scratch video, I was having issues getting the scratches to be as subtle as I wanted in Photoshop because of the opacity limitations while still having this be dark. So theoretically I could do that where I just make a scratch texture and then I can mess with the bump weight to get that to be how I wanted and map in the rest of the scratches. But honestly, I have never found a reason to actually do that, but you could if you wanted to. So hopefully that makes sense in terms of just like different ways to use maps. Again, you might need to go through and sort of play with some of these values. The other benefit of using semi-procedural texturing to set something like this up with the paint on chrome is you would need different colors for like all of the roughness and all of the metalness. Like for roughness, like this would want to be white and this would want to be whatever gray your background paint was set to, and it just, I don't know, to me it's really hard to manage and just like becomes very confusing. If you're one of my students, I don't care how you set things up. If you want to do procedural, if you want to do traditional texturing, really doesn't matter as long as you get the correct effect in the end, in my opinion. But that's usually sort of how I'll set things up for things like this. So basically, like for scratches in an existing material, like plastic, if it's just solid plastic that's scratched, I'll usually just set up, you know, one bump map or something for that. I might set up, for that, it seems like if you had, you know, a smudge on it, like a coffee stain, it would be excessive to go through and make a whole new texture for that, like I sort of tried to do with the fingerprint. In that case, I probably would just make a roughness map for that. Because the scratches probably are going to be the same roughness as everything else, so you can kind of move things around independently. And then from there, if you needed to, you could just sort of tweak that with a ramp shader. So, yeah. I like procedural if you have different materials in the same object and sort of regular texture maps if you're just doing, you know, smudges or like slight changes of the surface finish on the same material.